Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Michael Punter's play Darker Shores. Story. Ooh. Yeah. I think it's an interesting ghost story, in part because of the conflict that it sets up between science, superstition, and religion. So, in this play, we have Gabriel Stokes, a naturalist, played in the original by Mark Gatiss, who I really, really like, and Tom Beauregard, an American spiritualist, played in the original by Julian Rindcut, whom I also really, really like. I didn't get to see it in the original production run, which was 2009. I wasn't in London at the Hampstead Theatre, which I have been to. But we have Stokes and Beauregard. Stokes is a scientist who, in the opening scene, has come to Beauregard, who is over in London. He has set up a spiritualist sort of practice, or whatever it is. I suppose practice is the right word. And Stokes comes to Beauregard basically starting from the premise of, I absolutely do not believe in ghosts, in the supernatural, in whatever it is, but I'm staying at this place on the coast, and some weird shit is happening, and I do not know how to explain it. Stokes very much sort of introduces this distinction. He says here, "It's important to remember that I am, first and foremost, a man of science, Dr. Beauregard, a natural historian. I live and breathe the unlettered past. The moments after that brooding spirit passed over the face of the waters." Beauregard interrupts and says, "As I was going to say, men of such stature oftentimes find it hard to accept." Stokes cuts him up, says, "The outrageous, the irrational, the impossible." Beauregard says, "The extraordinary, that which presently rests beyond our science." Stokes says, "Dr. Beauregard, consider this." He takes a small apple and places it between them. "Bought in the market this afternoon." Beauregard says, "An apple." Stokes says, "Source of our first great unhappiness." Beauregard says, "Very well." Stokes says, "Sir, how can we be certain that this exists?" Beauregard picks up the apple, weighs it. Stokes says, "The evidence of our senses?" Beauregard says, "I suppose so." Stokes takes the apple. Stokes says, "Let's say some cataclysm stripped us of our sight, and then our smell, then our taste, and then our touch." Beauregard, smiling, says, "My, you have truly considered this, Professor." Stokes says, "Would this apple exist to you? Would it, and therefore does it, Dr. Beauregard?" He sits forward, urgent, agitated. "Does it exist at all?" He holds up the apple. Beauregard says, "It exists, sir. It exists. There must be demonstrations, proofs." Stokes says, "This hypothetical cataclysm has taken our world away." Beauregard says, "Except it has not." He drinks. Stokes resets the apple. Beat. Stokes says, "That question has troubled me since I could first think. Indeed, I believe it to be the most troubling thought I could experience, until I came to the sea house. What happened to me in that house, Dr. Beauregard, I cannot explain, cannot rationalize, cannot comprehend." So, this is introducing some important thematic stuff, right? On the one hand, you've got the scientist who absolutely rejects the supernatural, no willingness whatsoever to consider anything beyond the natural world. But we also have the epistemological question, and this is, of course, a major problem for science, right? How do we, if science is about attempting to comprehend the phenomena of the world, the stuff that exists, right? The world as it is, how do we know that we're doing that in a trustworthy way? Right? And this is a major philosophical question as well as a scientific question. Can we trust our senses? And if the answer is no, then what is the alternative for how we know something in the world, right? And this, of course, is connected to this sort of schism between science and superstition, right? Science and the supernatural, because Beauregard would assert that the supernatural may simply be things, even natural things, strangely enough, that science simply has not charted yet, right? That science, the limits of science are such that what it cannot currently explain may be understood as supernatural. But as science gains more and more knowledge, it can peel back the layers of what is inexplicable. This, of course, we know to be true. The entire history of science is evidence of this. But the embrace of the supernatural, nonetheless, does challenge this, right? Because the supernatural, almost by definition, is that for which there is no scientific evidence within the current paradigms and methodology of science. And Stokes is absolutely opposed to this, right? And this is a very strange position on some level for scientists to take, to say, if we cannot currently measure it scientifically, then it is irrational and impossible. That's actually a remarkably bad scientific position. It's more, I would say, generally a caricature of the scientific rationalist position than an actual reflection of most scientific rationalism. Because most scientists, in my experience, or that I know of, 100% accept that there are things we cannot currently explain, but that we may be able to explain in the future. So there's that debate at the heart of Darker Shores, is this question of how do we understand reality? And what are the limits of that reality and of our understanding of it? But what I find very, very strange about this is the third term that is introduced here, because Stokes is extremely religious. He is a religious fundamentalist, realistically. He, as a naturalist, is working on a book to refute Darwin, to refute the theory of evolution by natural selection, on the basis that God created the universe in 6 days, rested on the seventh, etc., as the Bible describes. There are, of course, many, many, many religious scientists, religious naturalists even, and there have been throughout history. From a modern perspective, most people, I think, accept that Darwin was correct, because the overwhelming balance of evidence suggests that he was, in the broadest brushstrokes at the very least, that creatures evolve through evolution based on primarily natural selection, that those animals most fitted to their environments are the most likely to pass on the traits that make them fittest, etc., etc. And very few people today, in at least throughout much of the world, accept the theory that the world was created in its present form about 6,000 years ago in a 6-day period, etc., etc. That's simply not regarded as scientifically rational anymore. In the 1800s, I can't remember this, 1875, 1876. In the 1870s, yeah, people were much more willing to believe that. The balance of evidence was not really there yet in a way that it is in 2009 when this premieres, or 2025 when I'm filming this. And so that sort of debate that sort of trifecta debate becomes really, really interesting, because on the one hand, you have Stokes saying, I am opposed to irrational belief. I am opposed to the supernatural, to things that cannot be explained scientifically. And at the same time, you have Stokes saying, I believe absolutely in the Bible, that it is literally true, and I'm going to build my scientific career on that basis. To us today, generally speaking, that seems paradoxical. And so that's one of the interesting things about the play. And it sort of takes that question and, as is so often the case, applies it to the issue of ghosts or spirits or poltergeists, right? What are these entities? Are they real entities? Are they natural? Are they supernatural? And if so, what does that mean? Could they be understood scientifically? Is spiritualism a kind of science, however sort of ill-defined and open to interpretation, open to sort of slipshod, generally unreliable methodologies, etc., etc. What is it, right? This is sort of the question that haunts Darker Shores, is what is the nature of the spirits that these characters encounter, and how, if at all, can they be understood? Through what tools or methodologies could we grasp what's going on?